there's lots of really good ideas, but I am wondering how many of you put things like protesting and civil disobedience? How about violence? And I hate to burst your bubbles, my wonderful teenage beloved children, but here's the thing, that even choosing not to vote is in fact a form of participation. You can't get away from participating in U.S. politics. No matter what you do, you're participating. Because here's the thing, choosing not to participate affects the outcome of our political process. It changes the way the system works. So your choice not to participate is in fact a way to affect the outcome, is in fact a way to participate in this government. Too bad, so sad, you can't get away. You can't get over it. You can't get away from it. Well, the problem is that the way that it affects the government is not usually a way in which you would prefer. Of course, there are these more traditional ways. Voting is perhaps one of the most common. You can give money to a campaign. You can campaign for people. You can volunteer for them. You can make phone calls. You can make Facebook posts and post funny memes to your Twitter, I guess. You can run for office. You can sue. And once again, you could simply do nothing at all, which is unfortunately America's favorite way to participate in American politics. Although, given the current state of the electoral system, I'm not sure I am quite that upset about it this year. No, I am. Okay, anyway, here's the thing. What do you notice? All of these take effort. They take time. Many of them take money, education. I would not make a very good, sorry, I'm trying to make this work. I would not make a very good second grade teacher because I have some sad news for you. Y'all, you're probably not going to be the president of the United States one day.
No.
I mean, perhaps one of you might. But here's the thing, I would like to pretend that I would be a great president of the United States, and that's not a reality for me. That is not possible. Because here's the thing, even if you can have your campaign completely funded by outside sources, magical donations from different people or whatever it is. I don't know about you, but I can't afford to take off like an entire year from my job to campaign for office. Or if I ran for Texas legislature, they have to take off like 4 months of their job every 2 years. And they don't get paid that much, so they have to have enough income to make up for that time in which they're not getting paid. So if we wonder why people turn to these more unconventional ways to participate, we should probably think about how difficult it is for most people to find ways to get involved. Now, that's not to say, let me reiterate as your friendly neighborhood government teacher, you should still get involved. It's not that hard, right? It doesn't take that much effort, and just because I'm never going to be president of the United States doesn't mean that my voice can't impact the direction of our country, right? One of the things I can do is talk to 200 or so young, almost 18-year-olds every single day and encourage you to be politically active and aware. That is in and of itself a way to affect the outcome. Even if you're not old enough to vote yet, you can do things like work for campaigns. The beauty of being young and having no real responsibilities besides the school, which, let's face it, is a pretty big responsibility, but small human beings to keep alive yet anyway, is that you can go out and volunteer, right? You can spend your weekend hours doing things that are not, that don't, that are just things that you want to do, that can affect outcomes for elections or can encourage people to get involved politically. You're in a really prime time of life. We look at the civil rights era. Why are so many of those reformers young people? It's easier for you when you are young, right? Lots of those things that take time are things that young people are uniquely primed to do. So you should still participate, but we should certainly understand that for many people, participation is a sacrifice, and frankly, that's why we call it your civic duty. Don't giggle because I said duty. It is your civic responsibility to do those things. Our country, I can see those of you who are trying not to laugh, our country works because people choose to be involved. It is a little bit of a sacrifice, and we need to do it anyway. Okay, so let's talk next about, oh, I got confused, some changes to who can vote. So in your teams, I would like you to see how many constitutional changes you can think of to who and how we participate in politics. I'll give you a hint. It starts with the 12th Amendment. It's going to end with the 26th Amendment. And in the middle is a law that's not an amendment, but is the Voting Rights Act of 1965. How many can you get? Go.
Make them citizens and then you let them vote. I think it's 15. Is it 15?
The 17th is allowed for Senate with direct election of senators. As opposed to
Yeah. I mean, but then like, yeah,
then 18 was prohibition. 19
because like otherwise,
women's
it's
rights.
changing who can vote because like
20th
it used to be
was
that only the
question
like,
mark.
the House of Representatives could vote to the senators,
Repeal prohibition.
and now it would be.
So,
All right. Here we go. What does the 12th Amendment do? Anybody remember? This is going to change the way the Electoral College functions. So you might remember that our first two elections after Washington's ended in a little bit of some embarrassment. So like in 1796 when John Adams was elected, he ended up with his opponent, Thomas Jefferson, as his vice president. That's because under the original Electoral College, each elector cast two votes for president, and whoever got the most votes became president, and the second most votes became vice president, which makes a lot of sense if you have no political parties, but when you do have political parties, that is the dumbest system ever. Then in 1800, they screwed it all up again, as was made famous in everybody's favorite musical. We end up with Jefferson and Burr, who were supposed to be running mates, president and vice president, going at it and going after each other, because Burr ends up as a contender for the presidency when somebody forgets to withhold their second electoral vote from him to make him vice president. So anyway, the 12th Amendment is going to change it so that now electors cast one vote for president and one vote for vice president, and then nobody gets confused. Technically, that means that the electors this year could choose, like, Clinton Pence or Trump Kane, but probably not, like a Trumpkin, but not quite. We made a Grumpkin. Our whatever, our jack-o'-lantern last night was a grumpy cat. It's pretty cute. Dorothy's is a happy cat, but then Mr. Rodriguez said grumpy cat. Okay, the 15th Amendment does what? Right, so allows African American men to vote. Technically speaking, it says that you cannot deny the right to vote on the basis of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. But anyway, it's basically to allow to be technical, it's African American men over the age of 21, but you're close enough. How about the 17th Amendment? What does that do? This changes how we vote for Senate or how we choose our senators. It allows for the direct election of senators. Previously, what had we done? Not the House of Representatives. The state legislatures had chosen the senators. But now, after the 17th Amendment, the people had a say in that. How about the 19th Amendment? Yeah, this is women's suffrage. And just for a moment, y'all, please don't be those weird Texas Tech people who were like, yeah, we should totally repeal women's suffrage. Women definitely should not be suffering. I know. One more time, can I just tell you, if somebody comes up to you with a history or government-related question that you do not know the answer to, please just walk away. Do not be caught on camera being DUMB, because I will die of embarrassment. Here we go. The 23rd Amendment, what does it do? Anybody? It gives Washington, D.C. 3 electors. They get the right to vote for president, kind of. In Washington, D.C., they're a little bit, grouchy about their lack of representation in Congress. In fact, their license plates say taxation without representation, because they have to pay income taxes, but they don't have any voting members of Congress. Sad for them. But the 23rd Amendment gives them 3 electors. They get the same number of electors as the least populous state. So, yay, D.C. There we go. The 24th, Wyoming. The 24th Amendment bans poll taxes. Thank you, A-pushers. I appreciate that vote of support. So the 24th Amendment bans poll taxes. You're not allowed to charge people to vote. Then I told you the one that's not a constitutional amendment. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed, and this allows the national government the authority to intervene in elections. So if elections are being held that violate the Voting Rights Act, things like voter intimidation or discrimination on registration or literacy tests or grandfather clauses or any number of those horribly racist, God bless America ways that the South found to keep people of color from voting, then the national government can get involved. And in fact, they did in every single former Confederate state. The national government got in, Texas included. The national government had to get involved to restructure their elections. They went in, they sent national poll workers to register people to vote, like to take their applications and give them their registration cards. They took over the polls on election day so that national workers were there welcoming people in, making sure their ballots didn't get lost or they weren't intimidated at the polls. They sent federal marshals to make sure that there was vote security. Nobody could get beat up on the way to or from the election site, whatever it was. Interestingly, well, probably you would understand this, then after the national government changed all the laws in the states, so that they would be up, not discriminating anymore, then the national government left and the states are supposed to be in charge of the elections. But as you probably understand, did we want the states to go back and change it all to the way it was before? No, that would completely defeat the purpose. So one part of the Voting Rights Act was something called pre-clearance, which said that in any of those states where the Voting Rights Commission had to go and fix stuff, they weren't allowed to change their election laws without getting pre-clearance, without getting the permission from the national government ahead of time. Again, this is to prevent the states from just turning everything back to the way it was. Then, 3 years ago, a problem arose. And the problem was this. So states like Pennsylvania and also Texas and Georgia began to decide that they wanted to pass photo ID laws for voting. They wanted to require people to use a photo ID in order to vote in elections. Well, Pennsylvania's legislature passed the law and it went into effect and like nothing happened. They just went about their business. But Texas and Georgia, remember, are states that were subject to the pre-clearance standard of the Voting Rights Act. And therefore, were they allowed to change their laws? Not until they got pre-clearance. Would the national government give them pre-clearance for a photo ID law? No, they wouldn't. And so Texas and Georgia and other states got really mad. They go, this isn't fair. Just because a long time ago we used to be racist and have bad laws doesn't mean that you should stop us from passing a law that has been allowed to pass in Pennsylvania. Nobody stopped Pennsylvania from passing their law. And so the case was Shelby County versus Holder. And in this case, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed with Texas and Georgia and said, you're right. And it struck down the pre-clearance portion of the Voting Rights Act. Now, the Voting Rights Act itself is still in place, right? But what this means is that the states can change their laws however they want to. And those laws will go into effect and will be, will have whatever impact they're going to have. And then after they go into effect, people can sue, right? And in fact, people from Texas and Georgia and Pennsylvania have all sued and said that these photo ID laws are discriminatory because more people who don't have photo IDs are more likely to be poor and members of color, communities of color. And so they have sued, and the Justice Department is now investigating those claims. And if the Justice Department finds that the laws have a discriminatory effect, then they can force the states to repeal them. But the difference is they have to go into effect first, right? The government can't stop them before they happen. They have to go into effect, and then people can file a complaint with the Voting Rights Commission after the fact. And that's not just true of the South, it's true of any state in the country. Okay, and then last but not least, we have the 26th Amendment, which allows 18-year-olds to vote. The context of the 26th Amendment is what? Yes, Vietnam War, the draft. If you're 18, you're old enough to fight and die for your country, so probably you should be old enough to be in charge or help be in charge of the guy who's going to tell you to go and fight and die for your country. So anyway, that's sort of how the Constitution has evolved over time. You should notice the general trend is what? To reduce participation? To increase the number of people who are able to participate. That's right. Okay, so now is where the notes officially start, if we're going back to this. And so the first few things are the purposes of elections. Why do we have elections? I'm going to try to be mostly apolitical here. We'll see how well I do. First of all, elections promote legitimacy. Having elections that are free and fair are important to allow people to have trust in their government. If you don't believe that the elections are being held in a free and fair way, then it undermines the respect people have for the government itself. It calls into question and limits the authority of the government, and basically just makes our country really not work well at all. So elections are a really important feature in promoting the legitimacy of the government itself. Elections also help to promote accountability. That is, even if we have this really cool election and then we don't have any more elections for, say, like 20 years, hello Latin America, then what happens is that those governments are not held accountable. The governments, many Latin American democracies start out really promising, right? They have these big revolutions, or they get rid of these really bad guys who are like, have all these military dictatorships. And then the new government gets in power and has all these really great plans to support the people, and then it gets scared. It gets scared that its power might be taken away from it, and so it just suspends elections, sort of indefinitely. And when we suspend elections, there is no longer any accountability. And even the very best government, the government that began with great intentions, all of a sudden now has nobody to hold them to those intentions, nobody to keep them sort of committed to what they need to do, because they can't be voted out of office. So accountability is a really important feature of elections. We have to have them. We have to have them regularly in order to promote a strong, accountable government. And then finally, of course, elections provide for peaceful transitions of power. Without regularly scheduled, free and fair elections, there's no real way to see one group of people leave power and a new group come in. We might really love President Obama, or we might really hate him, but whatever it is, we're confident that his term is up and somebody new is going to come in, one way or the other. And that predictability, the idea that an election is going to cause that shift, helps to promote stability. There's no fear about we don't know what, well, there maybe is a little bit of fear this year, but anyway, there's no sense that we're not sure if Obama's going to leave or not. We're not sure if he's going to still be in power or not. No, our elections are really clear. It's really easy to follow. You know what's going to happen next, and that predictability helps to promote stability. So all in all, elections perform a really important function in maintaining our democracy as a whole. We have to commit to our elections. We have to commit to their legitimacy. We have to commit to using them to hold people accountable, and we have to do so on a regular basis. So this next bit kind of goes in sort of the white space, around where it says General Election Day. While we're here, we can say that General Election Day is really Federal Election Day. Federal, because what is federalism? Yes, sharing of power between the national government and the states, also local governments, because they're a sub-government of the states. So the General Election Day is the day in which we have federal elections across the board. But of course, it's in fact the states who are in charge of those elections. The states are the ones who run elections. And this is an example of what? Vertical federalism or horizontal federalism? Talk to your teams. States run elections. Is that vertical or horizontal?
I don't remember which one was I gonna open it. A horizontal federalism is between states. So. Yeah, so it would, like, horizontal federalism is like, you don't have to pay law.
Okay.
Or like. Okay.
All right, so is it vertical or horizontal? It is vertical, because if you see my little diagram over here, vertical federalism is between the national government and the states. This is unusual because this is one of the few examples of a time when the states are doing something for the national government, right? Most of the time, power is flowing downward, right, from the national government to the states. Give me an example of something that would count as horizontal federalism. Full faith and credit and privileges and immunities. Good. Glad we're remembering this from August. So full faith and credit, privileges and immunities, those are examples of horizontal federalism. Let's just review. This is an example of vertical federalism. So on Wednesday, we're going to talk about the election process itself. How do you get elected, from the primary cycle all the way through the general election. And on Wednesday, we will be less than a week away from having a new president-elect.